Welcome to the Exposing Pseudo-Astronomy podcast for another example of astronomy and astronomy-related misconceptions, mistakes, half-truths, and conspiracies. My name is Stuart Robbins, and this is episode number 97 for the first third of January 2014. Today I'm bringing you the first part of an interview with Michael Heiser to talk about ancient aliens. Dr. Michael Heiser is a scholar in the fields of biblical studies and the ancient Near East. Mike has 2 master's degrees in those fields and earned his PhD in Hebrew, Bible, and Semitic languages at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is currently the academic editor at Logos Bible Software, where he does work on ancient language databases and resources. Mike is fairly well known for his online debunking of ancient alien or ancient astronaut theories, particularly that of the late Zecharia Sitchen. He's done this through his website sitcheniswrong.com and his blog Paleobabble. Those and many others of Mike's websites will be linked up in the show notes for this episode. So with that said, welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on, and we might actually split this into 2 episodes, so people might get a double dose of you. So with that said, before jumping right into things, you are a PhD scholar in, basically for the layperson, ancient literature, and you have peer-reviewed books and peer-reviewed papers. What got you interested in talking about things like ancient aliens, UFOs, Sitchens, and those related kinds of topics?
Well, I basically got interested in this. There's both a roundabout explanation and a more direct explanation. In terms of the roundabout explanation, I've always been interested in this sort of thing, strange things about antiquity. I can remember when I was a kid watching In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, for example, and just being, fascinated with that. So I always had some sort of interest, but I was sort of a dabbler at best, and more or less went about life, in things closer to reality anyway. Mm-hmm. But when I got to grad school and was at the stage where I was supposed to be working on my dissertation, like so many in my department, I was just sort of burned out by the whole experience. And I took what should have been the first year of my dissertation writing process and wrote a novel. I didn't want to do anything that felt academic. I didn't want to write my dissertation. I just needed a break. And so I thought that, hey, I have a neat idea for a novel. Why don't I take the things that I'm trained in, ancient texts and all this other, stuff as far as, languages and whatnot, and then marry that to some of this paranormal stuff that I was real interested in, mm-hmm. and I'd done a good bit of reading about, and then of course make it sort of this supernatural, theological, religious thriller, and just kind of do that for a year because it was something I'd always wanted to do, was try to write fiction. So I figured, hey, why not? Well, I did that, and then to make a long story short, this thing that I wrote that wasn't actually even a book yet got me on the Art Bell show, and the original Art Bell show, Coast to Coast, mm-hmm. and that happened.
I've never heard of that
in a really
show.
Inexplicable way. Yeah, yeah. Well, the crazy thing is having listened to that a lot, I thought art's a celebrity, and it's going to take months and months of people hammering at him to try to get me on this show. And a friend of mine goaded me into this. And literally the next day, I came home after teaching, and my wife met me at the door. And she said, "You're not going to believe who was just on the phone." I said, "Well, it was Art Bell." I thought, my friend must have called her, this is a gag now. But it was really him. I called the number back, and then I wound up getting booked on the show. Well, after that happened, then all these people started to surface, and a lot of them were defending, the ideas of this guy, Zecharia Sitchen. Well, I had heard of Sitchen a little bit. I hadn't given him too much thought. I looked at his work because he claimed to be a scholar of ancient texts and these areas that I was, studying in grad school, and it didn't take too long, 10 or 20 pages into the 12th planet to know that this guy he doesn't really know any of the things that are credited to him. And I don't know that he's really studied any of these languages. It was actually disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
But I more or less just sort of tossed him to the side. Well, when I went on the show, then everything just sort of blew up, and I was getting hate mail, I was getting love mail, I was getting invitations to do this or that show, and I sort of got dragged into the subject matter a lot more deeply and quickly than I imagined I would, and that led to creating the Sitchen site, because I figured, well, I need to have a website, so I don't have to keep answering email. I can just send people links, and the rest is history, so to speak. So I've always been interested, but this isn't what I do. I mean, my life doesn't revolve around Zecharia Sitchin and ancient astronauts, but it's been really interesting at all the things you get accused of, and
yes.
I'm a disinformation working for fill in the blank, and my wife loves that, because her first question is always, what am I doing with the checks? I don't see any of the
That's been my
payment.
response.
But so that's been interesting, comical, a little bit disturbing, in some cases. But I've had fun with it, and I think, or at least I hope, that it's providing some sort of actual service to get involved, because I do think scholars and people who are in the hard sciences, and really experts in anything, ought to be doing things to put the cookies on the lower shelf, to do what they do for the non-specialist.
Mm-hmm.
The intelligent person out there who wants to know, has real questions, but in a lot of cases can't get to the information, because what you get in periodicals like Time and Newsweek or whatever, if they ever touch any of this, is largely written by people who don't have content area expertise. They're experienced in journalism in a given area, but you get distillation, of the information. You never really get to the stuff that the geeks are really talking about. Yeah. And so it's nice when a few of them will hand that to people and try to make it useful.
And so you don't regret getting into it. You don't regret sort of having this sort of side, pretty much job, unpaid side job of doing this extra stuff, this addressing Sitchin stuff and the ancient aliens and getting the hate mail and the love mail. You don't really regret it.
No, I don't regret it. I've enjoyed it for the most part. And usually people, in the old days, you'd get an email from someone that was what I would call a committed Sitchinite, a fundamentalist Sitchinite, and I felt like it's really my job to try to answer every point here and try to set this person straight and steer them to the right material. Thinking, the mythology in my head at the time was, this person really wants information.
Exactly.
That person actually doesn't want information. that person, the person who's a zealot just wants to lambast you, and no amount of actual data that you could show that person is going to matter at all. So it's easier now, because I can sort of, after one email, I know if that's that person, mm-hmm. and that's what Google filters are for. But other people, I usually give people one or two chances, at an email correspondence to be rational, to understand, what it is I'm saying, and what I'm asking for. My tactic, if I have a tactic, is to ask for primary source data. Very simple things that, if this material exists, you ought to be able to produce it, and so should your hero, mm-hmm. Mr. Sitchin. He ought to be able to cite tablet line, whatnot. And that, for the rational person, they usually get it, and then they, boy, I don't know what to say now. Well, that's an honest answer. But the zealot, it just doesn't matter. You could, if they believe the sky is red every day, that's just what they're going to think. It really doesn't matter. So once I got over that hump, I was sort of okay with the traffic, with the mail traffic and whatnot. But I don't regret it.
Okay, well, let's get right into things. So we've talked a little bit about Sitchin already. Let's talk more generally about the ancient aliens stuff. Sort of, if you could talk about what your broad issues are with what one might call the fad of ancient aliens and ancient astronauts today, because you take a very different approach than I do with the astronomy part of it. You're much more the literature side of it, it seems. What are the broad issues that you have with the Ancient Aliens stuff today?
Well, I mean, they're in broad strokes. Again, that's how you frame the question. In broad strokes, I don't like to see ancient material of any kind forced into the 20th and 21st century, as though those people were writing about, advanced science or advanced science fiction concepts. I think that's absurd. I also don't like the idea that we would use modernity as an interpretive filter, on that material, so kind of coming at it from the opposite side. I think we need to let ancient material be what it is, say what it says, within its own worldview and context, rather than trying to, rape and pillage it for some idea that we desperately want to believe in. So there's this sort of, let's be honest, with what this material is, that's a broad stroke concern. I'm also concerned about how people tend to use these ideas as some sort of, in their mind, legitimate competing worldview. Beyond there's a theistic worldview, there's an atheistic worldview, or an atheist materialistic worldview, and now we have this other view where we have aliens coming here and creating. I don't like Darwin. I don't like anything about creation. So hey, here we go. Let's just do this one, and sort of assuming that it's on the same level as either or both of the others. That intelligent human beings have been debating for centuries and millennia, and all of a sudden this one comes in, and again trying to assert similar truth claims. And I understand the impulse to do that. I mean, I'm not faulting anybody for being human here, but what I really object to is the notion that I have this idea that I read from some guy who wrote in the 1970s, and this guy doesn't have a command of, the scientific worldview. He doesn't have a command of the ancient text, but I'm still going to believe him because that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside.